Welcome to Small Talk by Sfarim Chatter. I'm Nachi Weinstein. On this episode of Small Talk, I'm going to be joined once again by Reb Shimon Szimonowitz, who is Reish Machoin Alei Zayis and a Rav in Lakewood, and we'll be discussing the Sefer Imrei Shai, which is a Sefer Hatorah. It's a collection of different Gedolim, Hatorah. It's a very unique type of a sefer. We're going to talk about the exact style and what that means. Not exactly your regular garden variety liquid sefer Hatorah. But thank you, Reb Shimon, for joining me once again.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be here.
This is a sefer Hatorah. There are many Sfarim Hatorah, whether those are primary Sfarim or liquid collection Sfarim. Why another sefer Hatorah?
I actually deal with this a lot about Svarim Hatorah. There are some publishing companies who actually have a policy that they do not accept any Svarim Hatorah. You pitch to them a Sefer Hatorah, unless it's somebody famous, they found Ksav Yat Nishagazari Hatorah, they will not accept a Sefer which is Hatorah. I don't have that policy because, as you know, my policy is that we are happy to service any young man who wants to publish his Torah, whether he wants to make 50 copies of it, 5 copies, or 500 or 5,000. We're willing to help everybody in publishing their Torah. So we don't have a policy of like, this is not going to sell, it's not going to go, we're not going to publish it. But the reason for it is because this is something that has recently been even worse just recently. And the fact is that there's an overabundance of material al Torah. It's been complicated even more. Now you go into shul these days and you find many pamphlets, and you go into your inbox and you find many publications that you get sent for free with this fresh material that gets sent out a Torah. And I myself am guilty of this. As you know, I have a weekly. And actually, this Mechaber himself of Imrei Shai, Reb Shlomo Edelstein, who happens to be a friend of mine, besides being a client, he also is guilty of this because the Sefer was put together from a collection of such kind of weekly emails and pamphlets that he published and he disseminated, and then eventually decided to put it together after years and years of work. He put it together into a Sefer. Now, if a person is going to come to shul and he's going to have a pile in multilingual and multifaceted Divrei Torah, stories, all kinds of material that comes fresh off the press every week, why would he walk into a Svarim store and go buy himself another Sefer al Torah? That is the challenge of Svarim al Torah, and the challenge is huge. And I don't want to minimize that challenge. That doesn't mean to say that people shouldn't publish their Chidushei Torah, and I'll get to the reason why I think it's still very valuable, even though right now it's an uphill battle to get yourself out there. But first, understand this genre of Svarim al Torah. I think I've discussed in the past, I don't know if it was with you, but I've mentioned this once before, the fact that the most popular Sefer is the Haggadah. Why is the Haggadah the most popular Sefer? I'll say it briefly, just to repeat it. The reason is because the kind of Svarim that people buy is usually, there's the basics. A person needs a Chumash, a person needs a Mishnah Brura, he needs the basic Svarim to learn. Beyond that, a person only buys something when he needs to go and give over to others. When he has to teach something, he needs something to a chiddush that other people don't have, then he wants to go and look for some new material which he can share or can inspire him or it can start his creative juices going, and he should be able to say something and be able to deliver something. Now, there's once a year where every person becomes a Maggid Shir, and that is Leil Pesach. Leil Pesach, every single person needs to say something, whether it's the kind of family you have to say a nice story, whether it's the kind of family you have to say a pilpul, inspiration, musar, hashkafa, emuna, whatever it is, a person is always looking for something. Therefore, new Haggadahs are constantly coming out, and there's constantly people who are looking to get it. I might have once mentioned, but I'll say it again because it's a good story. When I was in the museum in Eretz Yisrael, so the tour guide took us into a room, and he said, I want to tell you something. He says, you see this room? Here you have manuscripts, medieval manuscripts of Haggadah Shel Pesach. And he says, from all the extant manuscripts of medieval times of the Rishonim, the most that have remained and are still survived for us are manuscripts of Haggadah Shel Pesach. And he was just saying it as an oddity that this is the thing that there's the most of. I said, can I explain to you why that is so? And I told him the reason is very simple. Every person, you see, in medieval times, in times of Shai, before the printing press, So in order to have a sefer, you needed to hand copy a sefer. Who can afford that? Who can afford the material? Who can afford the labor? And how many people were able to do that? Therefore, the only recourse was to get a professional to write it for you and spend a lot of money. Nobody can afford that. But what do you need Svarim for? Chumash, he goes to shul, he hears Kriyas Hatorah. A siddur, you'll hear from the chazan and you daven along, and most people memorized it by heart. The only time when a person needs an extended amount of text, a lot of text, and he has to be able to say it on his own, is going to be Leil Pasach. So every Yid had to have a hand-copied Haggadah. And therefore, if there was so much of it, it survived. Later, a friend of mine, was actually Laser Fisher. He told me an interesting insight. He said another reason why the Haggadahs are the ones who survived more than anything else. He said very simple. He said, not very simple, actually. I think my reason is the simple reason, but his reason is also intriguing. He says when it comes to Leil Pesach, people are much more sentimental. People who all year round do things on their own, on Pesach night, they'll go and imitate their father, their grandfather. So it's more likely people treasure that Haggadah that their father held in his hand by his Seder, or the grandfather held in his hand by his Seder. So not just was there an overabundance of Haggadahs as in comparison to other handwritten Svarim, it also probably was treasured and kept as a family heirloom more than others. That's an interesting addition to what I was saying. But what does that have anything to do with Svarim al Torah? It has to do with Svarim al Torah because after Haggadah Shal Pesach, it's another time when people have a pressure to share something. People are constantly under pressure, whether it's from their family, from their own, whether they feel a need to do it, or or they just think it's the right thing to do. Whatever it is, a person needs to say something by the Shabbos table. And the most popular thing and the most logical thing to say by Shabbos table is a Dvar Torah and Parsha. This is traditional. I actually, as we're talking, I'm remembering a very interesting thing that actually Schneer Lyman published some of these things. There used to be in the times of, I believe it was the 17th or 18th century. I'd have to look that up to see exactly when it was. And the Bachrim would go, and Shiva Bachrim, they would eat by the local Balabatim who invite them in for Sudas. And they also had a pressure to share a Dvar Torah. They had a pressure to share a Dvar Torah. Now, every Bachar learns in Yeshiva all week, a Sugi and Yavamis, he doesn't necessarily have a good Dvar Torah on the Parsha. But the Balabatim don't know to appreciate that. They expect if you're learning all week in Yeshiva, you for sure we're preparing a good Dvar Torah to share at my table. And here he is sharing his food with his Bachar. And his basic expectation was that the Bachar should share a Dvar Torah at his table. And that's maybe might have been even the impetus for him to invite the Bachar for a Suda. So the Bachram had notebooks that would go around in the yeshivas in those days, where they had collections of different Torahs. For Bachram would be able to take from the stencils, what we would call stencils, they just called it machbaros, and they had these Chidushei Torah, these Dvar Torahs on the Parsha, so Bachram could take from there and share it with others. And Schneer Lyman, at his family Simchas, he published a few of these volumes that had survived for the collection from the Bachrim back in the day. So there we see the pressure of actually having a Dvar Torah on the Parsha. Rabbanim also have that pressure. Every week you have to come up with something, and you hope that you can maybe recycle something from 3 years ago, 4 years ago, but you have to little change it, do something different. There's always one person who unfortunately remembers he said the same thing last year, and then you have to go and come up with something new. So there's a constant need for Divrei Torah. On the other hand, because there is such an overabundance of people's creativity and saying Chidushei Torah, it's the most obvious thing that people are collecting it as well. So it's supply and demand. The demand is very, very high, but the supply is also very high. And currently, the supply of new things, like we said, this influx of all these pamphlets and all these gilyonis are so much oversaturated the market that it's very hard to get a Sefer al Torah. Now, why are we sitting here talking about a Sefer al Torah after I just went and explained how difficult it is to get noticed? The answer is this Sefer, and I can honestly say so, from all the Svarim al Torah, there's a unique chidush in the whole entire idea of a Sefer that does not exist in any other Sefer. It's a good Sefer, good likut for sure, but there's something that's unique here. I don't think you've ever seen this before, which is the concept that Rav Shlomo Edelstein came up with. And that concept goes as follows. Each parsha is divided up in inyanim. Each inyan has a few pieces on it. Sometimes it can be 2 pieces, 3 pieces, 4 pieces, 5 pieces. These pieces are each one independent divrei Torah on a pasuk, not necessarily in the parsha of where the inyan is in. And I'll explain. It already sounds a little complicated. To explain, Meaning, what he's doing is he's connecting the different concepts found, not it's the same concepts found in different svarim. So just to give you an example, and I'll show you why this example is a little bit interesting. You'd go to Parsha Kisavoy, and by the way, this is a big sefer. This sefer has over almost 900 pages. But in Parshas Kisavoy, Inyan Zayin. So the general Inyan here is that even after a person became accomplished and he achieved wealth or whatever it is that he achieved, he still has to go back and revisit his inspiration for Yiras Shamayim. It's the point of departure is the pasuk Vayim Shemai Tishma B'Koil Hashem Alikecha Uva Lecha Kol Habrachas Elo V'Sigucha Ki Sishma B'Koil Hashem Alikecha. So the question is, it says twice. It's a redundancy here. V'Hayim Shemai Tishma, and then the end it ends off again. Ki Sishma B'Koil Hashem Alikecha. So his response is on page Tov Reish Samach in the Sefer. It says, his answer is like this. First, you have to have Yiras Shamayim. Shemai Tishma B'Koil Hashem Alikecha. But then you get blessed. Because you have Yiras Shamayim, you get blessed, you get wealth, and therefore, Ba'al Lecha Kol Habrachas Elo V'Sigucha. But now that you got wealth, now you think that you're koichi v'aitzim yadi, you earned it on your own, and you start forgetting about Hashem, which is one of the adverse results of wealth, and therefore he says. So again, Hashem says, now that you got the bracha, again kisishma b'koil Hashem alikecha, and okay, it's a nice Hatorah, and he goes with this, and he says pshat. In the Berachas HaChodesh that we say when we do Berachas HaChodesh in Shul, we say that Chaim shesh beim Yiras Shamayim v'Yiras Chet, right? And then we go and say Chaim shlosh v'chavod, and then repeat again Chaim shtebanu havas Torah v'Yiras Shamayim. And everyone asks the question: didn't we already ask for Chaim shesh beim Yiras Shamayim v'Yiras Chet? The answer is after you asked for Chaim shlosh v'chavod, and now you got Oish v'chavod, you have to again revisit the need to have Chaim shetebanu havas Torah v'Yiras Shamayim. Great Hatorah. Any nice Likud Sefer would have this Hatorah. So what's unique about this Sefer? What's unique about this Sefer is, first of all, his sources. The source for this Hatorah is a Sefer Kerem HaTzvi. I wouldn't know what Kerem HaTzvi is, but luckily there's a bibliography that we put in the back of the Sefer. And if you look at the back of the Sefer in the bibliography, you'll immediately be able to identify the Sefer Kerem HaTzvi with Tzvi Hirsch Farber from the early Talmidim in Slobodka, and he was from the Niastim, from the founders of the Kilas Charedim in the city of London. It gives you his dates, when he was born and when he's died. So now, first of all, you learned to sort of nice Hatorah, and you saw a source for it. But what's even more intriguing, there's another source for the same exact Hatorah, and the other source is the Sefer Shari Simcha. Who's the Shari Simcha? Rab Simcha Bunim Ehrenfeld, the Shevet Sofer. So this vort is a Slobodka vort, and at the same time, a Preshberg vort. Exact same vort. That's already interesting. Then he goes, Ois Beis. That will be Ois Aleph. Ois Beis is a little bit it's a little bit different, but similar concept. And this time, it's from the Chidushei Harim. So in the name of the Rebbe Bonim of Pershischa. So Rebbe Bonim of Pershischa is it's more like the Pershischa take on this, the more like the Kotzke take on this. And he says when a person gets something from Shemayim, why does a person earn anything from Shemayim? Why does a person earn wealth? Because he has Shviras Halev. Without Shviras Halev, you won't get anything. That's a real Kotzke lesson. Oh, he said, but now that you got the thing that you earned because of Yishviras Halev, so you're not so broken anymore. You're not so broken, you're going to lose the item. Therefore, the pasuk says, after you get it, you have to go and again, you have to go again back to revisit your Shviras Halev. So you have a very similar concept. We're connecting over here the same Hatorah from the Kerem HaTzvi from Slobodka Talmud, from the Shari Simcha from the Preshbar Gerov, and now you have the same vort in the Chidushei, not the same exact vort, but a similar concept from the Chidushei Harim and the Rabbunim HaPershischa. And here comes the third part, and I will end with this. Now he has a vort from the Mayon Beis HaShe'eva. So now we went and segued to Frankfurt or to Mir, however you want to look at the Shimon Schwab. For this, I think most of your listeners won't have to have the bibliography. And he says that he's talking about a different pasuk entirely. Now it's a pasuk in Shoftim. So even though what we're reading from is Parshas Kisavoy, its idea of stringing together three of similar concepts from very different sources and even from on very different psukim. And now you have a vort in Parshas Shoftim, which is put over here in Parshas Kisavoy, not because it's Parshas Kisavoy, because it connects to the concepts of different vorts in Parshas Kisavoy. And Over here, he has from Shimon Schwab, again, the very similar kind of concept. And Shimon Schwab also bases it on the Berachas HaChodesh, Chaim Shel Oisher V'Chaved. Now, what's very important about the Sefer is that you're able to see a concept, see it in various sources and in various places. And I think any good darshan would always want that. It's one thing to say a local drush and say, I have something on this week's parsha, and I saw a nice thing in a nice sefer. It's different when I can go and put together a whole drasha. This is basically material ready for any darshan. It says the same thing in this sefer, and it says it about another pasuk, the same lesson. That's something which is very useful. And there's also something very unique over here, that it brings together so many different sources. And this has to do with the author's, his background himself. I happen to be, I know him from for quite a few years. So his family is, today was we're recording the day of the Satmarov's yard side. His grandfather, his father's father is a real Satmar background. I think he might be even buried near the Rebbe in Kiryas Yoel. I believe so. His mother's family, believe it or not, Spink. I don't know how much you know about the Hungarian politics, but Spink and Satmar before the war would not have been able to marry each other. That's really a match made in the war, after the war. And so that's his family. So that's a real Hasidic family. And you have a lot of Hasidic Hatorahs from Hungarian sources, as we saw. The Shai Simcha is not Hasidic, but you see Hungarian sources, and there's many very Hasidic Hungarian sources. At the same time, he's a Torah Tamima Talmud. He learned together with me in Torah Tamim, Reb Shlomo Feivel, who gave Haskam over here. So you have all those yeshivish sources, and it's wonderful. He brings that together. And that wouldn't have been what makes the Sefer so unique. Others have done that too. But the combination of stringing together varts from so many different sources on so many different psukim in together, and the whole structure is very unique. It's hard to describe entirely during this episode, but if a person looks at the Sefer, he'll see it. It's very, very interesting and very rewarding for someone who has an appreciation of a breadth of sources.
I think you did a nice job explaining it because, first of all, most people will see this online, or they'll see this posted on Farm Chat, or they'll see it in the Farm, so oh, another Sefer Hatorah. And even if they open it, you see, okay, it's not original material. Someone quoting at the end of each thing, it has the Maramakim, where it's from. But they wouldn't know that. So now you can explain it, how it goes by topic. You also, I don't think you mentioned that there's side headers, little kitzur side headers on the side of each passage, where you have a little, in short, you can see right away what it's for. So would you say...
let me clarify, that's not in short. As I mentioned, in each Inyan, like in this case where I illustrated the point, so you had Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Aleph being the word from the Shari Simcha and the Kerem Atzvi, Beis being the Chidush Yarim, Gimel being the Mayin Beis Hashe'eva. So those three things, each one are dependent Hatorahs. You can read each one on its own, and it is on its own. They're not connected, inherently connected, other than the fact that the author placed them side by side to show you the connection. The main title, is the name of what connects all three pieces. The sidebar is what gives you the name of that individual Dvar Torah, which is an independent Dvar Torah. Each one can be read on its own without seeing the one before and the one afterwards.
Got it. Really, as you've been saying, the Mechaber's job here, although he doesn't have any notes, he didn't do any like Torah, it was creating this tapestry and weaving it together was really his job. That's what he was doing. That's what makes a sefer unique. So is this a sefer, usually asked at the end, but let's ask this here because it belongs here. Is this a sefer that's meant for darshanim, for rabbanim, speaking in shul every week, or anybody who wants to say Dvar Torah anywhere, it's good for you? Meaning, I understand this for both, but who is it? Is there a primary intended audience?
So, first of all, the author would have to speak for himself for that. But I would tell you this much. It happens to be I do have to speak every Shabbos. And this is not the material that I would use when I speak on Shabbos, because I always say original content, my own ideas that I think of. And I'm not trying to show off. It's just my nature that I like to share something that my own idea, and not stringing together different Dvar Torahs. That's totally not what I do. But I love reading from the Sefer because I do like these kind of Dvar Torahs for my own fulfillment. So for my own personal experience, I would say it's more of something that I enjoy looking at and seeing. I very much like seeing when you see the same concept across different groups. Each group feels so unique and says, oh, this is a Slobodka Vart, but it's also in Preshberg, and it's also in Preshischa, and it's also in Frankfurt Mir. That, to me, that's very interesting. And it's also interesting at the same time, we see the similarities, to see the differences, how each one has his nuance and how he presents the general same lesson. So for me, it would be for self-fulfillment and for learning. For others, it might be a way to put together a drasha. I don't think his intention was to help people make drasha. It's not a drasha cheating sefer. I don't want to talk for him, but I don't think that's what it is.
Now, the sefer is over 800 pages. It's really a massive sefer. part of that is over 150 pages or so of maftechas, of indexes. And now there's also a bibliography, which is very nice because, as you've said, there's a wide range of sources here. So it's nice to explain who those are. So talk a little bit, explain what type of maftechas, because those familiar with maftechas, you can have all different types of maftechas. So what type of maftechas did you include in the Sefer?
So Nachi, as usual, you hit one of the triggers. So I have a trigger with maftechas. So first thing is, a lot of times people come in and they say, I want a maftech. I had this actually today. Someone came and said, I would like to make a maftech on my sefer.
What type of sefer was that?
He was doing also a sefer al-Torah.
Oh, also,
but he was doing more classic.
Depends on the sefer though, maftech, right? When you print a sefer al-Shabbat al-Shas, we didn't use maftech. It didn't need so much. It was daf al-daf. Depends what the sefer is.
Yeah, but he was doing more like Lomda Shapis al-Torah.
Okay.
So I asked him, and he really stopped. He was a smart person. He's paused for a second. He says, you're right. He says, I want to make a maftech. I said, I'll gladly do a maftech. And I opened the drawer and I said, if you want to have extra money, you want to put it anywhere, you should please put it in here. So I wouldn't be happy to go ahead and sell you a maftech. But I asked him, I said, when was the last time you were learning Sanhedrin Daf Nun Ches and you open the Sefer on Chumash? What does he say about the Sanhedrin Daf Nun Ches? So why in the world do people do that they make a maftech? Now, I didn't say why in the world anyone does it, but people are just, let's make a maftech. Let's go ahead and do it. I don't see the purpose in it because who's ever going to use it in that way?
So, but it does depend.
It wasn't finished, but I'll let you talk.
I know, but I want to jump in. I usually don't. I want to jump in here. Like, for example, Shals for Tshuva, especially new editions, must. It's terrible when they don't do it. Drusha, especially classical Drushas farm. If you want to find something in the Drusha, you're going to pull open a Shabbos Tshuva Drusha from whoever, you need to work through maftech. Now, I don't know if you need maftech makairis, maftech ishim, maftech zarachim. I don't know if you need every type of maftechas. Certain svarim, certain topics, especially if they're older classes, older read on svarim versus a new one, are more disposed to more maftechas, if you will, rather than a guy writing a lump to sefer on chumash. I think there is a difference. It depends on the sefer. But go ahead. I want to hear what you
absolutely. It absolutely. And we'll see about this sefer. Is a very interesting way that he did the maftech, and I'll explain in a minute. And it's very much important to ask yourself maftech. Yes, you're right. Droshes Chasam Sofer, because it's classic and because it's so important, and because there are things that I would look by topic and by source. There's also some classics that a person sometimes uses to jog their memory. I remember he says something about this Gemara. I don't know if he says it in this drasha, in that drasha, and I want to be machzer avedasi. It helps me that way also. Again, I think it would be a bit presumptuous for an author in our generation to say someone needs a maftech in my sefer because he'll be learning my sefer, then I want to remember what I said about Sanhedrin and Ches, and he's going to go back and try to find it in the mafteches. I think it's a bit presumptuous for someone who's publishing a sefer today to think that way. Therefore, I think it doesn't make much sense for the typical person putting out a sefer al Torah or even a sefer al Shas. He should make a mafteches. And very often I ask the person, when was the last time you actually sat down and used a maftech for a sefer like that? I asked someone, I said, even for Meshech Chochma, when was the last time you sat down, looked at a Gemara and said, a maftech al makairis, and said, where does the Meshech Chochma speak about this Gemara? It's so rare, I don't know why people are willing to spend so much money and time on the mafteches. There's another factor here, which goes back to our first conversation as well, which is the digital factor. And that is, we were talking about, I was saying how discouraging it is for people to put out svarim, and there's a flooded market, it's an oversaturated market, but there is a silver lining. The silver lining is that with all these digital search engines, and with all, whether it's Oitzer HaChochma, whether it's Bar Ilan, or whether today it's even searching the web, or whether it's AI, whatever that we don't even know where that's going. When you create content, even if you put out a sefer out there, even if only 2 copies sold, but that's because how is someone's supposed to notice you? I tell people all the time, if you publish a sefer on Yavamis, and every one of your pieces are as good as Chidusha Rabbeinu Chaim Halevi, they really are. It really, somehow you're hidden going, and every one of your pieces goes Chidusha Rabbeinu Chaim Halevi, you don't have a good chance of selling your sefer because there's just no need for it. There's so much out there. I mean, the Chavetz Chaim said that in his day. Imagine about today, and therefore, who's going to go and find you? But when a person searches Oitzer HaChochma and he puts in a few key words, his chance of finding you, until they learn how to improve their algorithm, is almost as high as finding somebody, the Chidusha Rabbeinu Chaim Halevi. So it levels the playing field, and then you're able to be found. So we create content, you put into the public domain, and you will be found. The same thing is, we don't know these AIs and all these kinds of things. They'll be consuming information, and if you create information, you create the Torah, you are putting yourself out there. So that should encourage people to do it, not necessarily to print thousands of copies, but to create formal published material, which will be recognized by these digital databases, if you may. But that also makes the maftech thing not as crucial. It used to be the thinking process was, you don't have a maftech, how will I ever find anything? It's not like that anymore. Yeah, maybe it'll be hard when it's a hard copy, only if you read through it, but it's a lot of money to make a maftech. But once you uploaded your sefer in Oitzer HaChochma, now you can find things that you have no reason to use a maftech. On Oitzer Chachma, you almost never use a maftech. So so almost every sefer will eventually have a maftech. That should be a comforting thought for somebody who doesn't do maftech. But really, I want to just say about this specific sefer. So when I told this machaber, I said, you can make a maftech in Yonim, your whole sefer is a maftech in Yonim. That is what your sefer is. You took Inyanim and brought them together. So now you're going to make another maftech to your maftech Inyanim. That is really what the sefer is. So we made up the following with him. There's two crucial maftechas here. One of them is most crucial, which is, like I mentioned before, in Parshas Kisavoi, in Inyan Zayin, Ois Gimel, there's a Dvar Torah which is based on and is on Parshas Shoftim. It doesn't just talk about an obscure pasuk and that comes into the Dvar Torah. It's really a Dvar Torah based on Shoftim. The only reason that it appears in Kisavoi is because that's where the whole Inyan is about that. So there's a crucial maftech here, which I'll say there HaParshiyos, which gives you every Dvar Torah on every pasuk. So for example, if you're looking for the Dvar Torah in this week's Parsha, you'll go to Parshas, I don't know when your listeners are going to be hearing this, but if you go to Parshas, I just randomly pick Kisavoi, I imagine one of the upcoming Parshas that they'll be listening. So if you go to Parshas Kisavoi, you'll see the first there's a Dvar Torah in Parshas Bechukoisai, directly on a pasuk in Parshas Bechukoisai. I'm sorry, in Bechukoisai, directly on a pasuk in Parshas Kisavoi. Yeah, then it's Kisavoi, then you have Bahar, then you have Vizay Sabracha, then you have Mishpatim. So you have so many Dvar Torahs that are directly on Kisavoi, but they are organized by topic, so they end up in a different parsha, and that's why the Maftech parsha is crucial in this sefer. It's not a waste of pages at all. It's really necessary. The Maftech Arachim was done with basically, because that you mentioned before, all those side captions are topics. So we took those topics, didn't subdivide them, and didn't break them down any further, and try to make a very granular maftech. Just took those topics and organized them in alphabetical order. So there is really no extra maftechas over here.
One thing to add to what you were saying about Mechaber and publishing Svarim, and even if the guy is Reb Chaim and he publishes on Yivamis, it's not going to be. So I have a friend that published a sefer on Masechta. Very nice stuff, actually. Not your typical. So he asked me, I was like, how do I get people to use it? I said, not by publishing a sefer like the way you're doing. My opinion on this matter is, for what it's worth, take a Kadman, redo it, and stick your Torah on the bottom. Meaning, you'll accomplish two things. One is a schos, you're republishing something that wasn't around. And by the way, to be clear, I didn't do this with Torah Chai. My notes there are much more minimal, as you know. Mechon Alizai said to work on it. But if someone wants to do this, and this guy doesn't have a huge, he's not a Ritva Yavamis, we're not talking like that. Smaller things. Take something that it stems with and you put it there. A, you're getting a schos, you're publishing the Kadman. B, people will buy the sefer because it's a new edition of this Achron or this Rishon. That's what people buy. That's what people are more likely to use your Torah. Rather, you're just putting out little sefer on Masechta, whatever. No one's going to buy it. No one's going to recognize it. No one's going to see it. It's just not going to be. It's funny. It seems like you're in the publishing business. You'll know this better. But for a while, at least when I was a bacher, I was in vogue. All these Simonim on Shas. It was every guy went to put Simonim on Shas. I don't think anyone bought any of them. I think they're probably all in a dustbin somewhere, all in Sheamus. Now it's changed to nitty gritty halacha or ala Torah. It's different styles farm now, but. There has to be a mahalach. It's just what you were saying, how to publish a sefer, how to get a sefer published. But ala Torah and Haggadah, at the end of the day, it's oversaturated, but it still sells. People still seem to buy it. People, read the parsha sheets. They're in the shul. Isaiah gets them dropped off in the glossy paper, so a fancy paper, maybe that's why. But people still read it. And this is, like I said, this Imrei Shai is something a little different. It's not your regular, it's not your classic, and hopefully this podcast helped explain and elucidate to the listener what this sefer is doing. It's not just Stam plunking down a couple of interesting marmakamis in one blender and be like, here, take a look at it. I just brought you random stuff with no rhyme or reason or methodology.
So I'm afraid that I didn't do justice to the Sefer if after all that you're saying it's a little different. I think it's more than a little different. There's something very original in the
Very
whole
different.
concept.
Drastically different.
I don't know if you're being sarcastic or not, but it's...
No. You're don't worry about my words.
It's something which is very unique, and there's a lot of originality here. And therefore, I do think it's something that has a lot of merit. And your point about the Simonim, again, I think those things are out there in the public domain. And if maybe not that many people bought the Sefer, I think they will be discovered one day, and they will be mashpia. And I do not necessarily agree that people are wasting their time. People shouldn't have any illusions. They shouldn't think they can sell thousands of copies. And I've already said on your podcast before that when people ask how many copies they should print, I say at least 3, one for you, one for your shver, one for your father, and then think who else needs it. But there is one thing which we also mentioned, our first podcast we ever made together.
One of the first Svarim Chatter episodes, by the way, 5 years ago.
Yes, I mentioned at the time, and I still stand by it, that if you do want your Sefer to be successful, you have to ask yourself, what is needed, and I'll create that. Even in your case of a kadmon, if the kadmon is not needed, I've seen people disappointed even that way. What is needed, and when you know what's needed, and I'm creating that to fill that need, you'll be successful. Now, Svarim Hatorah we said is needed. It's just that it's oversaturated. There's a high demand and a high supply. But perhaps this is something unique over here, which goes and cuts boundaries, and it's a new way. It's a new, like you said, it's a new tapestry. A tapestry has nothing new. It's just the way it's put together. That's the chiddush.
Also, I want to highlight, I do think the Mafteches is very nice in the Sefer, and it does help, especially because on Shabbos, it's a Sefer Hatorah, someone's looking at on Shabbos, the Mafteches help. Also, I really like the bibliography. A bibliography is helpful for being able to know what it is, and even at your classic Likud Sefer doesn't always have it, and you're like, I don't know who this is, I don't know who that is, and sometimes you don't appreciate the breadth of the sources quoted, and you can read the bibliography and see what it is. I think that's a nice little addition, as well as the extensive Mafteches. So yes, it's a very unique Sefer, very interesting, very different. I'll link in the show's notes. You can purchase it through Alizayas. As always, Alizayas is free shipping, express shipping even. And well, it's not express. I think it's just UPS, so it comes very quickly. By the way, for those interested, you should know when you always order with Alizayas, it's very quick. You know, when I posted that the Teres Chaim is available there, people told me, "Wow, it came so fast." At the end of the day, they order it and it ships. It goes to UPS. In the tri-state area, I think UPS is basically like next day with regular UPS as opposed to like the mail. So you're not using medium mail. That's the point. So for those interested in order there, it's also available in the Svarim store. You can check it out. Save for Imrei, Shai, Hatorah, and thank you, Reb Shimon, for joining me once again.
Thank you so much. This is really good.